Hello everyone, I'm Shraddha Jaiswal. I'm the Director of Verbal Curriculum at eGMAT. First of all, my team and I would like to congratulate BB and his dedicated team on reaching the 1 million post milestone and for making this event possible. Over the past few years, we've seen GMAT Club contribute to student success, helping them ace the GMAT. And today's milestone is a testament of their success and an indication of greater and better things in the future. We wish the team luck for their future efforts. Now, let me begin the session here by talking about the purpose of this presentation. Now, the purpose of this session is to help you solve reading comprehension questions efficiently while attaining high accuracy. This session is designed for test takers who essentially need to improve on RC. The strategies, techniques, and processes presented in this session have been designed on conjunction with hundreds of eGMAT customers and work wonderfully well for non-natives. Now, doing RC effectively requires that one reads the passage effectively. So, we will begin this session with an overview of reading strategies that will enable you to do just that. We will then apply these strategies to one difficult passage. After that, we will attempt 4 exercise questions, and during this process, we will discuss the strategies for common question types such as main point, detail, and inference. Now, perfecting these strategies requires practice. Therefore, we have lined up some practice exercises on eGMAT. Sign up for a free account to take the practice exercises. These contain 10 passages amounting to more than 40 questions. Now, before we go on to the reading strategies, let's understand what leads to improved RC performance. People who do well on RC read efficiently. That is, while reading the passage, they are able to decipher the key transition, determine the purpose of various paragraphs, and are able to arrive at the main point of the passage. To help you do the same, the eGMAT RC course contains 5 files where we teach and make you practice reading strategies. The second core skill required to master RC is to understand how to approach various question types. eGMAT course has 17 concept files to help you master various question types. Lastly, even though GMAT RC does not require any external knowledge, we have found that people fare much better when they are familiar with various passage types. To facilitate this, we have added 50 passages in the course to familiarize you with various question types. Now, to read efficiently, we recommend 7 key reading strategies. These are getting immersed in the passage, summarizing the passage at appropriate intervals, stopping and predicting the direction of the passage when you come across a keyword, abbreviating technical terms in the passage so that a highly technical topic can be simplified, reading through the details rather quickly, understanding the sentence structure to understand the meaning of the sentence, and lastly, understanding the meaning of a rather unfamiliar word through its context. Now, we will explain these strategies briefly. This is the passage that we will use as an example to apply the reading strategies. We will also solve 4 questions based on this passage. Now, those who are viewing this recording on Adobe Connect can download the passage here. The most important thing that you can do to facilitate good comprehension is getting immersed in the passage. Half the battle is won if you start caring about the topic in the passage, or in other words, show interest in the topic. It is likely that you are a person of science background and you get a passage that deals with, say, conservatism or women emancipation or archaeology. You may not have any interest on these topics. But if you continue reading the passage with a disinterest, then applying other strategies will also become extremely difficult and comprehension will become challenging. So the key thing to remember is that regardless of the subject of the passage, you should be passionate about it, at least while you are reading and understanding the passage. Now let's see how to apply this strategy. Read the first line of the passage, then pause, and then think about the subject. Here, try to predict the possible things that the author could discuss about this topic. Show that you care about the subject. Let's apply this first strategy on the passage. Researchers argue that the brainstem comprising the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain is better at handling a large amount of information. So now, before moving on to the second sentence of this passage, we take a pause and understand the topic and get immersed in the passage. The first line of the passage is presenting a comparison. It talks about some parts of the brain that are better at handling larger amount of information. Reading this, we can take a guess here that the author will now talk about those parts of the brain that are not as good in handling large amount of information. He may also talk about functions that those unmentioned parts of the brain can perform better. Well, this seems to be interesting. So by doing such pre-thinking, we can get ourselves immersed in the passage. The next important thing to keep in mind is to pause at appropriate intervals and summarize the information presented by the author. By summarizing the passage in this manner, you absorb the information as you read along. This step ensures that before you move on to the next set of information in the passage, you understand well the information that the author has already presented. Now, how to apply this strategy? Read a set of sentences and then pause. Now you may ask, after how many sentences should I pause? The answer is, read till the point you do not have an information overload. Pause right before you start to feel the information overload. Now you may ask, when will I experience such overload? And the answer to this is, it really depends on you and the topic of the passage. Well, let's take an example what we mean here. Suppose we have a marketing buff and we have a humanities guru. And we have two passages, one on the topic of emancipation of women and the other on marketing techniques. Now, it is very likely that the marketing buff will be more well-versed with the topic of marketing techniques and the humanities guru will be more comfortable with the topic of emancipation of women. And this plays into the determination of after how many lines will I experience information overload. So the marketing buff may pause at 4 or 5 lines while reading the passage on marketing techniques. But if the humanities guru is reading the same marketing passage, he may need to pause after every 2-3 lines to absorb the information. On similar lines, the passage on emancipation of women will likely come more naturally to the humanities guru. So he may need to stop after every 4 or 5 lines. But the marketing buff may need to stop at every 2-3 lines to absorb the information. So whatever be the passage individual combination, the key thing to remember is that you should read a set of lines and then pause. Simplify the information in your own words and make appropriate notes. Now you may ask, what should I write down? How much should I write down? The answer is, again, it depends. You may write down loads of information or you may write in shorthand. Maybe in the beginning, as you are learning the process, you take down a lot of notes, but as you practice, the length of notes may reduce. The goal is that you simplify the information read and then you make notes. Another thing that I would like to point out is that the ability to absorb information is like muscle. It improves with practice. Now let's see this strategy in action as we read along. Let's read the second sentence now. On the other hand, the cerebral cortex that is responsible for rational decision making is better at applying very strict mathematical rules on fewer variables involving well-defined parameters. So the comparison has been made clear here. The author is comparing two different parts of the brain on their ability to process certain amount of information under given limitations. Now the first two lines use many technical terms that are hard to remember. So let us make a note of the information presented here to keep in mind the abilities of both brainstem and cerebral cortex. We can refer to these information all along the passage. Now let's pay attention to the summary that we've just created. It is not necessary to jot down all the information given in the passage. Information that are easier to retain in mind or are very detailed can be skipped. We made a short note of the information presented in the first two lines to remember the abilities of two different kinds of a little hard to remember brain parts so that we can use this information all along the passage. Also care to take notes only at points where you feel the information is necessary for understanding the passage but is difficult to remember for certain reasons such as difficult technical words, complex sentence structure, etc. Just write such information in simpler way for your reference so that you need not go back and forth in the passage to relate to them. Reading strategy 3. Predict the thoughts through keywords. To understand the significance of this strategy, let's get in the mind of the author as he writes a passage. In a passage, he presents different ideas. These are typically interlinked ideas. Now, in order to make his passage coherent, logically organized, and understandable, he uses transition words to introduce any new idea. For example, he may use the word moreover to present new information that adds to the thought that he had already presented. Likewise, he may use the word however to present new information that contradicts prior information. Now we as readers can actually exploit this effective writing practice to our benefits. If we pay attention to these transition words or what we call keywords, we can actively predict what the author will present next. Such active prediction helps us absorb the new information much more effectively. So as we are reading the passage, we should identify the keyword and stop and think what the author may present next. With that understanding, we should read what follows. So now let's continue with the passage and see this strategy at work. Let's apply this strategy here. We will resume reading from the second sentence itself. On the other hand, the cerebral cortex that is responsible for rational decision making is better at applying very strict mathematical rules on fewer variables involving well-defined parameters. Now here we have our first keyword, on the other hand, that clarifies the comparison mentioned in the previous sentence. Brainstem has been compared to cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex that facilitates taking rational decisions is better at applying strict rules with some limitations. Let's now read the next sentence. Oops, sorry about that. Consequently, researchers agree that it is better to sleep on certain complex decisions rather than burn midnight oil to arrive at rational solution. So now it's time to highlight our second keyword here, consequently. This keyword suggests that the author is going to present some sort of outcome of this comparison. So the researchers say not to depend on cerebral cortex for certain kind of complex decision. So predicting keywords helps us predict the thought of the author. Reading strategy 4. Shorten the technical terms and names. Whenever we come across any technical term or long name of a person or an organization, and we know that these terms or names will be repeated in the passage, we should shorten them to simplify our reading and understanding process. In the test environment, such technical terms and unknown names only add to the anxiety and the complexity of the passage and act more like roadblocks. So it's better to smooth these roadblocks and abbreviate them for better understanding. Let's read the second sentence again to see this strategy in action. On the other hand, the cerebral cortex that is responsible for rational decision making is better at applying very strict mathematical rules on fewer variables involving well-defined parameters. Now, we can call medulla oblongata MO and cerebral cortex CO. This would allow our mind to focus on the relationships and transitions presented in the passage. A passage contains all kinds of information, key information that the author wants to put across, and detailed information that the author uses to put his point across. Now, we should understand and summarize the key information. But when it comes to detailed information, first we should be able to identify that it is indeed a detailed information. Secondly, we should be able to summarize the gist of it. For example, why the author is presenting this detail. We do not really need to know what is this detailed information. Let's see an example here. Here is the first line of the example passage that we are using. It says something about brainstem. Notice that it adds additional information as to what this brainstem comprises. Now, this information is a detailed information, and we necessarily need not remember what brainstem consists of. It is enough to understand that brainstem can better handle large amount of information. So whenever we come across such detailed information, we must read them quickly and move on. A typical RC passage contains long sentences with interlinked ideas. The key to effective understanding of such sentences is to focus on the sentence structure. That is, identify the clauses that the sentence is made up of, identify the subject-verb pairs, look for any list that may be present in this long sentence, understand the role of modifiers. Well, essentially, if you break the long sentences down into smaller chunks or clauses, it would be a lot easier for you to make the interlinkages in the sentence and thereby understand what the author is suggesting. So it does help to put on your sentence correction hat. But the best part is that you're not looking to correct the sentence. You are only looking to understand the meaning of the sentence. And as we teach in the sentence correction course, understanding the sentence structure of such long sentences helps to understand the intended meaning. Now, as you read the RC passage, you may come across a word that is unfamiliar to you. Since you may not know the meaning of this word right away, you may get a bit anxious. The key is to not get into that mode. Yes, you may not know the meaning of a certain word in isolation. But remember, in RC passages, the word is used in context, and often you can infer the meaning of the word from the context in which it is used. Apart from the context, you can also try to infer the meaning from the way the word is derived, that is, from the roots of the word. Let's consider the word hypothesized. If you pay close attention, this word is derived from the word hypothesis. This means theory. So hypothesized possibly means theorized or simply stated. So remember, the key thing is not to get scared of such unfamiliar words. Keep your mind open and remain confident that you can infer the meaning from either the context or the derivation of the word. You do not need to know the exact dictionary meaning of the word. Let's now apply these strategies to the passage in question. This is the passage that we will use as an example to apply all the reading strategies that we've learned so far. So let's begin reading the passage. Researchers argue that the brain stem comprising the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain is better at handling a large amount of information. Okay, so the author begins the passage by talking about an argument that the researchers have. According to them, the brain stem can better handle a large amount of information. The author has given details as to what the brain stem comprises. This information can be read quickly as the terms used here are too mouthful and not too vital to remember also. Now, after reading the first line of the passage, we know that the author has presented a comparison here as we see the word better. Let's take a pause here and let's think, what can we read next in this paragraph? The passage may talk about those parts of the brain the researchers have compared the brainstem with. It may also present the reason why such comparison has been made. Well, let's continue reading to find out. On the other hand, the cerebral cortex that is responsible for rational decision making is better at applying very strict mathematical rules on fewer variables involving well-defined parameters. So here we have a keyword, on the other hand, that clarifies the comparison mentioned in the previous sentence. Brainstem has been compared to cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex that facilitates taking rational decisions is better at applying strict rules with some limitations. So here we have some vital information that we must make a quick note of. Brainstem can process large amount of information while cerebral cortex can process very strict rules with limited parameters. Now, brainstem is easy to pronounce and remember as well, but cerebral cortex is a kind of tongue twister. So let's shorten these terms for easy reference. So now we call brainstem BS and cerebral cortex CC. Let's resume reading. Consequently, researchers agree that it is better to sleep on certain complex decision rather than burn midnight oil to arrive at rational solution. Another keyword that we spot here is consequently, that suggests that the author is going to present some sort of outcome of this comparison. So the researchers say not to depend on CC for certain kind of complex decision. Wow, this is getting interesting here. They believe that in these situations, rationality comes on the way of making a rational decision and that the brainstem is better equipped to handle them than the cerebral cortex, arguing that it's better to leave such decisions on unconscious thought process, thinking without paying attention. Alright, so according to these researchers, in situations where BS must be relied upon to take a complex decision, depending on CC is not good because CC cannot handle such decision making. So here it becomes clear that BS is responsible for unconscious thought process while CC is responsible for conscious thought process. Let's get back to the passage. There are decisions where the researchers believe conscious thought outperforms unconscious thought. Well, in the previous sentence, the author says that per the researchers, some complex decision must be left on the unconscious mind. In this sentence, he says that for some other complex decisions, the CC performs better than the BS. For example, when a decision requires application of very strict mathematical rules, conscious thought is beneficial. Now, keyword for example suggests that the author is going to present an example where CC is more effective in taking a complex decision than the BS. We must rely on CC to take a complex decision when we need to process very strict mathematical rules to arrive at the decision. This brings us to the end of this paragraph. So now let's summarize this paragraph to find the gist of it. Now, according to the researchers, for complex decisions that need application of strict mathematical rules, we must engage our conscious mind or CC to arrive at the decision. When the complex decision needs to be arrived at by processing a huge amount of information, then we must leave the decision on our unconscious mind. That is the BS. Now, before moving on to the next paragraph, let's pre-think what we can read next in the upcoming paragraphs. Since the first paragraph already specifies when to engage the BS and when to engage the CC for best decisions, the author may present some studies that led the researchers to make these claims. Or the author may present some scenarios or examples to show what kind of decision can be arrived at by using CC and by using BS. Or he may also present just one example to prove that in that particular situation, depending on CC gives better results than BS or vice versa. Remember, this kind of active pre-thinking is very crucial to remain immersed and interested in the passage. Let's begin reading the second paragraph now. Several experiments that incorporated several combinations of plethora of specifications revealed the workings of the brainstem and the cerebral cortex. Well, this complicated sentence here says that many experiments have shown how conscious and unconscious mind work. These experiments had several permutations and combinations of a large variety of parameters. In one such experiment, the participants were asked to choose a car from 10 leading brands of automobiles. The author presents the first example here to show the workings of the two minds. In an experiment, the participants were asked to choose a car from 10 leading brands. The researchers gave them just 4 parameters to consider for their choice: mileage, cost, reliability, and resale value, asking them to take instantaneous decision. Alright, so they were asked to consider only 4 specifications and give their answer then and there. Well, we can quickly read through those specifications without remembering them. And these specifications are mileage, cost, reliability, and resale value. Alright, let's resume reading. The participants came up with the second to none decision in this scenario, proving that the conscious mind was super efficient in processing limited amount of data. Alright, so the participants took the best decision in this scenario. The decision proved that the conscious mind yielded the best result in processing limited number of data to come to a crucial decision in a limited span of time. Keeping all the other conditions fixed, the researchers this time asked the participants to sleep on the choice and declare their decision later. Okay, so the researchers in another experiment asked the same participants to take the same decision in a few days. So the only thing they changed here is the time factor. The resulting choices that participants made were not as optimal. Alright, so the decision that these participants made was not as good as their previous decision, which they had made right on the spot. So this brings us to the end of this paragraph, and now let's summarize it. So we saw 2 experiments in this paragraph. Experiment 1 proved that conscious mind took the optimal decision when participants had only 4 parameters for consideration to choose a car from 10 brands. On the other hand, experiment 2 proved that the same decision taken by the unconscious mind was not that optimal. This brings us to the last paragraph of this passage. In another set of similar experiments, the researchers were baffled by the appalling choices that the test group made when they conducted the same experiment with 10 leading brands, but doubled the parameters, adding such features to consider as brand appeal, durability, safety, and off-road capability. All right, this paragraph talks about another set of experiments. There are two words that might look little difficult to understand: baffled and appalling. Let's begin with baffled. The sentence says that the researchers were baffled by the choices that the test group made. The only change that they had made to the first experiment was that they had doubled the parameters, but the results still baffled them. Hence, we can infer from the context of the sentence here is that baffled means confused. Now let's infer the meaning of appalling. The researchers were confused to see the appalling choices made by the test group when the parameters were doubled. The meaning is not very clear from this sentence, so we will have to read the next one to see if we get any clue there. But here, one thing is to be noticed that we can quickly read additional 4 parameters that are brand appeal, durability, safety, and off-road capability, as this information is actually a detailed information and need not be remembered. Alright, let's resume reading. The researchers argued that cerebral cortex could not make sense of the expanded information set that led to poor decision making. Alright, so this line says that the conscious mind could not process the large amount of information that was presented in this experiment. Hence, the participants made poor choice. So here we have it. Appalling means disappointing because, according to the researchers, the decision was poor. Alright, the dictionary meaning of this word, by the way, is causing dismay or horror. Let's resume reading. However, the decisions made by another test group that was allowed to sleep on the decision before declaring their choice were much more worthy, even though not as good as the decision produced by the conscious mind that processed fewer parameters. Alright, so keyword however suggests that we are going to read something contrasting here. The same experiment was given to another test group who was asked to take the decision from unconscious mind. This test group gave better answers than the test group who was asked to make decision instantly. Alright, so we have another keyword here, which is even though, that indicates the presence of another contrasting thought. Although the decision given by the group allowed to sleep on it was better, the decision was not as good as the decision given by the test group who had given their decision instantly by processing just 4 parameters in the very first experiment mentioned in the previous paragraph. This led the researchers to conclude that our unconscious mind can process larger amounts of information as long as we give it time to do so. Alright, so this sentence is pretty easy to understand, so let's get back to the passage now. Another suitable situation, according to researchers, to employ the goal-dependent deliberative process in the absence of conscious attention is when we are low on energy or easily distracted at the time when we are faced with a complex decision to make. Alright, so here we have a long, complicated sentence. So let's put on our sentence correction hat here and understand the meaning by understanding the structure of this sentence. Marked in blue is the first clause where suitable situation is the subject and is the verb. This long phrase, goal-dependent deliberative process in the absence of conscious attention, actually means unconscious mind. So, the researchers say that it is good to employ the unconscious mind when, well, the answer comes in the second clause marked in green, when we have less energy or are distracted at the time. This time has been modified by the following clause marked in purple that says when we need to make a complex decision. Hence, the sentence says that we should employ unconscious mind to take a complex decision when we are low in energy or are easily distracted. Let's read the last line now. Similarly, when in high spirits, it may be better to invoke the conscious mind to arrive at a much more optimal solution. So we have a keyword here again, similarly. This keyword suggests that the author is going to talk about a similar situation like the previous one. He says that as we should employ unconscious mind to take a decision when low in energy or easily distracted, we should employ conscious mind when high in energy. Well, with this, we finish reading the passage. So let's summarize this paragraph now. In this paragraph, the author again presented two experiments. The first experiment proved that conscious mind could not make sense of increased information. The test group gave poor decision. The second experiment proved that unconscious mind yields better result when the decision needs to be taken by processing larger amount of information. Now it's time to review the passage in its entirety. Paragraph 1 talks about how the conscious and the unconscious minds process information. In paragraph 2, the author presents two experiments to show that only conscious mind can take an optimal complex decision when the parameters are limited. Paragraph 3, through another set of examples, prove that unconscious mind can better handle a large amount of information to arrive at a complex decision. Now, it is very important to review the complete passage once after you have read and created individual paragraph summaries. This is your time to visualize the complete picture and understand how the author constructed the passage. As you can see, the author first introduced the idea when to use conscious mind and when to use unconscious mind. Next, through one set of examples, the author shows when to use the conscious mind for optimal complex decision. In the last paragraph, he cites another set of examples, this time to show in which conditions unconscious mind can be employed to make a crucial decision. It's time for some exercise now. So let's solve 4 questions related to the passage that we just read. So here comes the first question that reads, the reason why the author has written this passage is that he wants to, and then we have the option answer choices. So this question is actually a main point question here because the question asks us to find out the reason why the author has written this passage. Now, before we solve this question, let us first know what are main point question types. Every RC passage is written for a reason. The main point of a passage is the reason or purpose for which the author has written the passage. It is also called the central idea or the central theme because, quite frankly, the main point is the idea that the author aims to communicate. Now, the main point does have a few characteristics. It is a single line statement that expresses the intent of the entire passage. It's broad, its broad scope spans the entire passage and is not limited to an example or a paragraph in the passage. Thirdly, it most likely will not contain any specific detail that is outlined in the passage. Now let's learn how to arrive at the main point of a passage. Paragraph summaries are the key to arriving at the main point. Recap what you learned in the key reading strategies concept. As we read the passage, we should summarize the paragraphs of the passage, and in the end, we should review all paragraph summaries to get the complete picture of the passage. Now, these paragraph summaries are of utmost importance since the main point or purpose of the passage is usually made up of summary of all the paragraph summaries. It would be fair to say that the main point is the summary of all paragraph summaries. If you like mathematical terminology, main point is union of all paragraph summaries. For example, let's assume that in a passage, through first paragraph, the author introduces a certain concept. In second paragraph, he then presents negatives of that concept. And then in the last paragraph, he presents positives of that concept. Thus, by taking the summary of all these paragraph summaries or union of these summaries, we can arrive at the main point or purpose of the author as the author's purpose is to evaluate the stated concept, and we say evaluate because he is not only presenting the negatives of the concept, but he is also presenting the positives of the same concept. So keep this in mind that paragraph summaries that you arrive at when you read and understand the passage are the key to arriving at main point of the passage. Now at this point, it's important to note the key process for answering main point questions. After reading the passage as per the process described in the reading strategies concept, you need to summarize the paragraphs. Then you need to pre-think the main point based on the individual paragraph summaries. Only after this pre-thinking step, you should move to the last step of evaluating the answer choices. So the first two steps of this process are conducted on the passage itself without even looking at the answer choices. So always make sure to pre-think the main point before you even start reviewing the answer choices. When you review the answer choices, you should keep in mind your pre-thought main point, and as you review each choice, you should have two things in mind. You are looking for the correct main point and you are striving to eliminate the 4 incorrect choices on very solid grounds. And you indeed use this pre-thought main point as a guiding light to do both these things. Select the correct answer and eliminate the incorrect ones. What also helps here is knowing the characteristics of wrong answer choices. And the characteristics of wrong answer choices has been explained in detail in our concept files on eGMAT.com. Alright, so the pre-thinking step is so important that we cannot really emphasize enough on it. Pre-thinking the main point in your mind, even before looking at the answer choices, helps you greatly in evaluating the answer choices and discarding the incorrect ones. So how does pre-thinking do that? When you pre-think the main point in your mind, you create a checklist to arrive at the answer. This process helps you while evaluating the answer choices and eliminating the incorrect ones. As is the case in CR, the process of pre-thinking the main point improves accuracy and saves time because it reduces or eliminates the need to reread the passage while evaluating the answer choices. The process we just learned. Let's bring in the summary of all the paragraphs here. This passage is about researchers' conclusion that while some complex decision must be taken from conscious mind, others may be left on the unconscious mind. The author starts the passage with this idea by elaborating on how these two minds process information. In second paragraph, he presents two experiments to show that when a decision needs to be taken by processing strict rules on limited information, we must use our conscious mind for best result. In third paragraph, he presents yet another set of experiments, this time to show that when a complex decision needs to be taken by processing a large amount of information, we should sleep on it, meaning we should leave the decision on our unconscious mind. Hence, through experiments, the author says that conscious mind can take the best decision of complex nature if decision making requires application of strict rules on limited parameters. If larger amount of information is needed to be processed, then the unconscious mind takes the optimal decision. Now, with this pre-thought main point in our mind, let's evaluate the answer choices. Choice A says that only CC, that is, only conscious mind, is capable of taking complex decision. This is not true because the passage has experiments to show that unconscious mind can also take complex decision. Hence, this choice is incorrect. Choice B talks about comparing and contrasting functions of two brains. Now, in the passage, the author presents the ability of two brains and not their functions. Moreover, not even once he says that one is better than the other. This choice is clearly incorrect. Choice C says that the author debates that CC can only take complex decisions. This is not true because firstly, there is no debate in the passage of any sort. Secondly, the author talks about the abilities of both the brains in equal terms. Hence, choice C is incorrect. Now let's take a look at choice D. This choice says that author wants to summarize through examples when to use conscious mind and when to use unconscious mind. Well, this is the correct answer because this choice is the reword of what we came up with during our pre-thinking process. Choice D is the correct answer. Choice E talks only about the ability of unconscious mind and says nothing about the conscious mind. This makes this choice incorrect. So, the correct answer of this main point question is choice D. Summarize through examples which situations are conducive for conscious minds and when to employ brainstem to make optimal decisions of complex nature. This is the second question from the passage. Now this question is a detailed question. How do we know it? Alright, let's learn about the detailed question types now. A paragraph may have multiple details. A detailed question asks you the what of any pertinent detail present in the passage. Even though an RC passage is written with the main idea in mind, to communicate this main point, the author includes a number of supporting ideas or details. It is understanding of these details or supporting ideas that is tested by the detailed questions. Hence, detailed questions test your ability to comprehend and reproduce the detailed information present in the passage. Now, you may be asked about the facts cited in the passage or about some specific content of argument cited in the passage or some information about any other descriptive detail in the passage. Now, you may wonder, how important are these detailed questions? The answer is very important. It is one of the key question types. In fact, approximately 30% of all questions are detail or supporting idea questions. This means that you may get 3 to 4 detailed questions in your exam. Now, it's fairly simple to identify detailed questions. They are typically worded in 3 different ways. According to the passage, the author mentions which the passage mentions. Now, to answer detailed questions, one should understand the passage well. Thus, it is very important to read and understand the passage using the key reading strategies. Once you understand the passage well, you would need to identify and locate the detailed information asked for in the question. And once you locate this information, you should be able to articulate or reword this detailed information. Now, there are 2 kinds of detailed questions. The ones that ask about a specific entity in the passage and the ones that are open-ended. That is, they ask about an entity that is widely discussed in the passage. For the specific questions, the process to follow starts from first reading and understanding the question, then locating the detailed information in the passage, and thereby pre-thinking the answer by rewording this information, and then selecting the correct answer by looking at the answer choices and eliminating the incorrect choices. Now, the process for open-ended question types is slightly different. For open-ended questions, since we cannot pre-think the answer, we should skip the pre-thinking step and move straight to the answer choice analysis. Question. The verbiage according to the passage implies that this is a detailed question. This is a specific question. So here comes back our second question. The verbiage according to the passage implies that this is a detailed question. This is a specific detailed question. Note the word distraction is used at the end of the passage. So let's read the relevant portion here. Another suitable situation according to researchers to employ the goal-dependent deliberative process in the absence of conscious attention is when we are low on energy or easily distracted at the time when we are faced with a complex decision to make. Alright, so after reading this relevant portion, we can come up with the pre-thought detail, which is the author recommends that when faced with a complex decision, we must use the unconscious mind when easily distracted. Now let's evaluate the answer choices while keeping this pre-thought detail in our minds. Choice A talks about putting the unconscious mind to rest when distracted and use conscious mind. This choice suggests just the opposite of what is written in the passage and hence is incorrect. Choice B talks about decisions having financial or economic impact. We know that nothing of this sort is even mentioned in the passage, so choice B is straight away incorrect. Choice C talks about putting the conscious mind to rest and using unconscious mind when easily distracted. Well, this choice is very well crafted, but definitely is not the correct answer because the passage mentions this only while taking a complex decision and not in all situations. So, choice C is crossed out. Choice D says when distracted easily, one should not expect the unconscious mind to work as effectively as when one is in high spirit. Now, the situation of being in high energy is not connected to the situation where one is distracted. So, this question is inconsistent. This leaves us only with choice E, and looks like choice E is the correct answer. Let's read the choice. Choice E states, when easily distracted while taking important decisions, one must let the conscious mind relax meaning one must make use of unconscious mind. Well, yes, this choice is the reword of our pre-thought detail and hence is the correct answer. Alright, so we've solved two questions, two more questions to go, and here comes our third question. The question reads, what does the author mean by in high spirits? So, the question is asking us to give out the meaning of in high spirits. This means that we need to infer the meaning here. So, what is the meaning of to infer? To infer means to derive by reasoning, conclude or judge from premises or evidence. In an RC question, you have the passage. When you get an inference question, you are tested on your ability to derive or conclude from the information that is presented in the passage. In other words, inference question measures your ability to understand an author's intended meaning in parts of a passage where the meaning is only suggested but not explicitly stated. So inference is the logical extension of the information presented in the passage. Let's take a small example passage here, which reads, Ford T1 was the most popular car in 1930. It came only in black color. Now from these two statements, it can be inferred that the most popular car in 1930 came in black. As you can really see that an inference is a simple logical deduction made from the information provided in the passage. So we know that inference is a logical deduction that can be made from the information in the passage. There are multiple ways in which test makers create correct inference choices. We have done a thorough review of correct inferences in official questions and we have discovered three main categories. First of all, you may be asked to infer the meaning of a word or phrase used in the passage. Secondly, an inference can be extension of statement. Thirdly, it can be combination of two or more statements in the passage. Now, this category, combination inference, has further categorization wherein you can make simple combination or you can take generic information present in the passage and come up with specific inference, or you can do just the reverse. Take specific information from the passage and draw a general inference based on those specific information. Note that the generic to specific and specific to generic are not that common, but they are prevalent to a decent enough scale that it was worth subcategorizing them. Such categorization of inference will help you better understand how you can deduce information from the information in the passage. And all these categories have been explained in details in our concept files. So let's learn how to solve an inference question. The first thing you do when you solve an inference question is to carefully read the question and understand what the question is asking you for. It is very important to understand about what aspect or entity in the passage does the question want you to infer information. Once you do that, you look at the passage and look for the pertinent location where you can find relevant information about this entity or information that is pertinent to this entity. Since you need to find the relevant information from the passage, you should know where to look for this. This is why understanding the passage well is very, very important. Now that you have the relevant information from the passage, you come up with an inference. Remember, an inference is a logical deduction that can be formed by any of these 5 ways we just spoke about. They are covered in detail in Inference Concept File on eGMAT.com. Now, we know there may be multiple possible inferences. At this stage, We do not want you to come up with all the possible inferences. Coming up with one inference is perfectly fine. And this one inference may not even be the one in the correct answer choice of the question. Clearly, if your inferences matches the one in correct answer, it's great. But even if it does not, your pre-thinking step was still successful, since what is important is that you do the due diligence to know what you're looking for per the question, to find that information in the passage, and then to make a logical deduction from that information. This exercise of pre-thinking to come up with an inference is helpful when you go through the answer choice analysis, because it provides you with a framework for evaluating the incorrect choices and selecting the correct choice. Now let's apply this process to the inference question we saw a few slides ago. Alright, so this question asks us the meaning of the phrase "in high spirits." Hence, it is an intended meaning inference question. The author has not explicitly explained in the passage the meaning of this phrase, so we need to infer the meaning from the relevant portion in the passage. This phrase is mentioned in the last line of the passage. In the highlighted area, it is said that unconscious mind should be employed when low on energy. Similarly, the keyword conscious mind should be invoked when in high spirits. Hence, in high spirits would mean high in energy, because use of conscious mind is recommended in that state. So we have a pre-thought inference here. Now with this in mind, let's evaluate the other answer choice. Here is choice A that says, in the influence of alcohol. Now this certainly cannot be the correct answer, because this is definitely not the intended meaning. So choice A is out. Choice B talks about being happy to be faced with difficult situation. This is also not the intended meaning. So yes, this choice is also incorrect. Choice C says something pretty similar to choice B. It says teeming with positive energy to face a tough decision. Well, we know that even this choice is incorrect, because this is not what the author means to say by in high spirits. Choice D talks about creative ideas to tackle every situation. This again is not the intended meaning of the sentence, and choice D is crossed out as well. So choice E that says fresh and energetic is the correct answer, because this is what the author means by in high spirits. End of question 3, and now we come to our last exercise question for this session. This question reads, what can be deduced by rationality comes on the way of making a rational decision. Now, let's solve this question by applying the same inference process. So, this question asks us the meaning of rationality comes on the way of making a rational decision. This clause is written in the context suitable to the passage. Hence, this is extension of statement kind of inference, where we need to read a few lines in the pertinent portion for the meaning of this clause. Good enough. Let's identify that portion. So, the highlighted portion in the passage says that in these situations, meaning the situations where the complex decision can be taken by the brainstem, rationality comes in the way of rational decision. Hence, the author wants to say here that the situation where conscious mind is not needed to take complex decision, employing cerebral cortex, there is not a very good idea. Okay, so now that we have come up with our pre-thought inference, let's quickly look at the answer choices. Choice A states something very similar to what we came up with during our pre-thinking exercise. It says conscious efforts do not necessarily yield best results. That's true. So this choice is the correct answer. Choice B means just the opposite of what is stated in the passage. So this choice is incorrect. Choice C gives a very generic meaning. The passage does not say that rational people always sleep on a decision. This choice is not correct. Choice D again states something absolutely opposite to what the clause actually means. This choice is incorrect. Choice E certainly does not state the intended meaning and hence is incorrect. So, this brings us to the end of our brief RC session. Now, before ado, this is how I would like to summarize the key points of this session. Only reading passages are not enough to solve RC questions. We must read the passages efficiently and understand the passage well. Summarizing every paragraph is an important step in understanding the RC passages well, as we get to understand the gist of the passage through this step. Pre-thinking at every stage keeps us connected and immersed in the passage all the time and give us the framework for effective POE so that we not only choose the correct answer choice for right reasons, but we also discard the wrong answer choices on solid grounds. Here, I also recommend some post-session exercise to cement the concepts that you just learned. So register for free on eGMAT.com and go to the Reading Comprehension section. Attempt the diagnostic file and the Level 2 Quiz 2 file. In addition, you can also access the main point concept and the main point practice files. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. Goodbye and take care.